Pirates, I can reject everything. Chapter 461 to 480. 461. Here, Shichibukai Jinbei officially joined the battle. Bartolomeo wore a green coxcomb head and nose ring, and made a very nasty look. Johnny and Joseph, who had just arrived, were just stunned by Bartolomeo. They also don't know this senior coxcomb in front of them. What kind of person is he? Bartolomeo suddenly smiled strangely and said, since everyone came from East Blue, it is considered a direct line. In the future, the two of you, just follow me. Also from East Blue, I have no reason not to take care of the two of you. Hearing this, Johnny and Joseph were stunned for a while, and then nodded hurriedly. Johnny, hey Isho, said, we are new here, and we are not very familiar with our Chris pirates. In the future, I will rely on seniors for more advice. Joseph followed Johnny and said with a smile, it's rare to meet the seniors of East Blue here, how lucky. The two of us are willing to follow the seniors. Bartolomeo, who received the response, nodded with satisfaction, and said in a dignified manner, there are also tricks to surviving in the Chris pirates. Here, if you don't have enough strength, you will be eliminated at any time. The changing expressions of Johnny and Joseph Vivi, Bartolomeo smiled strangely. He waved his hand and continued, but if you join my squad, I will naturally take good care of you. Under my hands, your strength will be greatly improved, you don't need to have any doubts about this. Also, I can guarantee that you will never be eliminated by the Chris pirates. Bartolomeo narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, I am very optimistic about the strength of the two of you. People with potential, plus a backer like me, the two of you have a bright future. Under Bartolomeo's coaxing and tricking, Johnny and Joseph successfully joined his squad. The other squad leaders who didn't move could not help shaking their heads slightly when they saw this scene. Luo Y hugged the ghost and said lightly, I hope these two people will not regret today's decision in the future. Hawkins was expressionless and said deadly, I'm afraid they would never have imagined that this one from East Blue, Senior. Actually, a freak. The other teams have on Bartolomeo's personal strength. But about Bartolomeo's sex, we can say is, in words. At this moment, Enel, who had been yawning all the time, suddenly stood up alertly. He looked at the sea with sharp eyes, and said coldly, there is movement in the water. Enel's sudden reaction, immediately. It caught the attention of others. Everyone came to the railing and probed out. Chris looked at the sea in front of him indifferently and didn't say anything. Instead, the eagle-eyed Mahawk on the side suddenly said, it looks like there are a lot of people here. The others frowned and looked at each other. Except Hawkeye Mahawk and Enel and others, no one noticed any movement in the water. Foxy pouted and said, I think everyone is nervous. In the sea of the New World, there are often some strange creatures. Just now, maybe some sea kings swam past. However, Lafitte was indifferent to Isho and shook his head, no. Enel, what they perceive, is still a long way away. Your observation Hockey, haven't reached their level of power yet, so they haven't sensed it yet. Chris also said casually, it's coming soon. Seeing this, the rest of the people could only shrug and accept the fact. At this moment, everyone in the Chris pirates stared at the sea level, motionless. If the garrison in the port of Pudola Kingdom notices this scene, I am afraid it will cause a lot of panic. Soon, a rapid sound came from the bottom of the water. Everyone can hear clearly. Perona floated in the air and said with interest, come here. Going out of the water. Before Perona could finish speaking, the water around the Chris was suddenly splashed one after another. Nami suddenly widened her eyes and shouted with joy, it's Boss Jinbei. He came with a lot of fish man. That everyone discovered that it was Jinbei and his party who had arrived here. Bakura gathered his hair and smiled generously. No wonder Jinbei doesn't need our people to respond. It turns out that they came from the bottom of the sea. Perona's eyes lit up, and she said with a smile, "It's amazing. They actually came out of the water. It's incredible." Jinbei jumped out of the water and came into the air. With a slight shake, the moisture on his body immediately disappeared. Chris, stay safe. The most complete Filu novel resource station. Supported by Miwench. If you want to join the group, add QQ 1,934,731,937. She will tell you the group number. 462. Jinbei arrives, welcome by Hawkeye. A lot of water splashed around the Chris, like a lotus flower in full bloom. As Jinbei jumped up, Arading and others also jumped out of the water unhurriedly. That sputtered from the fish man's body radiated a dazzling light under the sunlight. Against the backdrop of these splendid water droplets refracting the sun, Jinbei and others seemed to be radiating light all over their bodies. "Chris, stay safe." And powerful voice pierced through the sky and reached the ears of everyone in the Chris Pirates. Jinbei grinned Isho, and then lightly landed on the deck of the Chris. Behind Jinbei, Arading and others also boarded the Chris with bright smiles. Jinbei looked at Chris and said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to be approaching the port of Puduola Kingdom. I almost thought that you had already started a war." Chris was indifferent to Isho, and said casually, "I can't wait for you guys. How can I start the war in advance? However, your way of appearing really surprised me." Arading, who was standing on the side, Isho, said, "We fishmen are the best at traveling in the sea. Our speed in the sea is much faster than a pirate ship. Boss Jinbei is afraid of delaying time on the road and missing the war. That's why we all choose such a way." Hearing this, everyone clicked their tongues twice, expressing their amazement. Everyone admires Fishman's speed in the sea. Lafitte pressed his hat and said very politely, "Fishman Island is so far away from Pudora Kingdom. Boss Jinbei can bring people to come to help. It's really troublesome for you." Jinbei immediately waved his hand and looked indifferent. "What's the trouble with this? Such a distance is nothing to us at all. Besides, as a loyal Chris, how can I sit back and watch?" "What? Jinbei, the nickname of the Sea Warrior, is not casual. He treats his friends, always worthy of the word chivalrous. It's natural to understand him more clearly. If he is in danger, he will definitely sacrifice himself, and also save Chris and others." Aradin on the side also laughed and said, "Captain Chris solved our fish big trouble on Man Island. He is our benefactor. Right now, the matter between the Chris Pirates and the Pudola Kingdom is raging, and the whole world is paying attention here. At this time, we will not stand idly by. We people from Fishman Island are naturally here to help Captain Chris." An octopus fishman held a long sword and said excitedly, "It is our honor to have the opportunity to do things for Captain Chris. Without Captain Chris, our Fishman Island would be in chaos now. Of Hody Jones and others has long been spread inside Fishman Island. Everyone on Fishman Island knows that if Hody Jones and his conspiracy succeed, Fishman Island will be plunged into an era of doom. It was Chris who appeared with the Chris Pirates and successfully prevented all this from happening." Fishman the Tuna also nodded and said gratefully, "And since Chris was hung on Fishman Island the flag of the pirates. Now, those who come to Fishman Island, whether they are pirates or other humans, will no longer dare to do bad things." A young starfish, Fishman, is also indifferent to Isho, saying, "Not only that, but now there is no Fishman in the auction house on Sabayati Archipelago. Those hateful mermaid dealers have long been scared away by Captain Chris's prestige. The changes Captain Chris has brought to our Fishman Island are simply too many." The other Fishmons also spoke up, expressing their gratitude and admiration for Chris. Thanks to Chris' presence, they are once again full of hope for the future of Fishman Island. They began to believe that Fishman Island will one day be able to live in peace with human beings. Eagle-eyed Mahawk, carrying a big black knife, walked up to Jinbei. "Long time no see, Jinbei. After many years, we can fight side by side again." With a smile in his eyes, Jinbei said lightly, "The last time we fought side by side, we were still young. At that time, neither you nor I became King Shichibukai. Now that you and I are both members of the Shichibukai Alliance, things change. It's always so elusive." Hakai Mihawk and Jinbei can be regarded as old friends reunion. When the two of them were young, they had faced a common enemy at sea. And the two joined forces and defeated the enemy. After the two of them meet again, it's time to become King Shichibukai. But for so many years, Jinbei and Mihawk have never joined forces. Collect, recommend, and share. 463. Shichibukai, 4 people have gathered. Hakai's recognition of Jinbei. Hakai Mihawk and Jinbei have been Shichibukai under the king for many years, but the intersection is not much. Every time the world government sends out a mission, the 7 of them will hardly be dispatched at the same time. That can make them work together to deal with has not yet appeared. But this time, they were finally able to fight side by side again. Moreover, it is to unite with the other kings, Shichibukai. This is something that the two of them have never experienced before. Hakai Mihawk said indifferently, "But this time, you and I will still be divided into 2 battlefields. Tomorrow, my mission is to stop Borsellino and those marines for the Chris pirates." Jinbei Vivi frowned and murmured, "Sengoku and the others, are they really going to do something to Chris? It's a lot earlier than I expected." For this news, Jinbei did not act too surprised. Because he has dealt with the world government and the Marine headquarters too many times, he already knows their behavior very well. Has risen rapidly in just 1 year. Not only is he powerful, but he has also gained a lot of powerful allies. What's more, Chris has gained an extremely powerful prestige in less than a year. All of this is unacceptable to the world government and the Marine headquarters. Jinbei had long thought that the world government and the Marine headquarters would have to deal with Chris sooner or later. They won't let Chris continue to grow. It's just that this time is too early. This also indirectly shows that Chris's threat to the world government is already unbearable for them. Chris sneered and said disdainfully, "It will be a matter of time before you break up with the world government. However, I have gotten everything I wanted by using the status of the King Shichibukai. Sengoku, they want to deal with me, just come." Although Chris's tone was cold, it had a light air. With him, these things have never been put on the table. Jinbei squinted his eyes and made a voice. "Sengoku wants to be right, it should only be Chris. I think if Mihawk comes forward, Borsellino and the others will never dare to act rashly. They don't know that this time, all 7 of us are going to be there. Give Sengoku the courage to fight all the King Shichibukai at the same time." Jinbei's idea coincides with Mihawk's. The identity of their king, Shichibukai, is the best cover. But Chris suddenly smiled strangely. "What you don't know is that Borsellino may be a variable." This time, Sengoku promised him a very generous reward, so Borsellino. He will probably do whatever it takes to kill me. In Chris's eyes, there was a little smile inadvertently. This is his disdain and indifference to Borsellino. Jinbei shrugged and said indifferently, "Borsellino, really strong. But he can't get past Mihawk. This time, Marine is only afraid that the bamboo basket will be empty, and it's gone." Saying that, Jinbei, Arading and the others all let out a burst of cheerful laughter. Jinbei gradually put away his smile and continued, "Chris, I am here this time, not just on behalf of myself. King Neptune has always been concerned about you and the entire Chris pirates, and he wants me to say hello to you on his behalf." A big wave of his hand, Jinbei turned back and pointed to the group of fish-man warriors behind him. "Some of these people are my subordinates, but most of them are warriors personally selected by King Neptune. King Neptune asked me to convey it on my behalf. He hopes that the Chris pirates can successfully take the kingdom of Kudora. And King Neptune also stated that as long as you need Chris, he will definitely use the strength of the whole country to help you capture the kingdom of Kudora." Chris's eyes swept across the group of Fishman Island warriors behind Jinbei, seeing the belief in victory and the grateful look in each of them. He couldn't help showing a faint smile and said, "Thank you King Neptune for me. But, it's not as difficult as you think to win the kingdom of Pudora. If the attacking of a Pudora kingdom requires Fishman Island to do everything to help me, then my ally is too weak." Hearing Chris teasing, Hancock also said, "With our current lineup, we can easily win the kingdom of Pudora. These Fishman warriors you brought are enough." Bartolomeo wore a green coxcomb head. "Hee Isho, yes, Boss Jinbei. With you and these Fishman brothers joining in, our team will be even stronger. Kingdom of Pudora, that's up to us." The most complete Filu novel resource station, supported by Miwench. If you want to join the group, add QQ 1,934,731,937, she will tell you the group number. 464. Here comes another Shichibukai, here comes Moria. Burgess geared up, grinning. Isho said, "I really can't stand it anymore. With the addition of Jinbei bosses and the others, our team is invincible. I feel like we can attack aggressively now." Poison licked his lips and showed a cruel smile. "Suddenly, I also have the will to fight. I really want to jump into battle right now." As Burgess and the poisonous man couldn't hold back, the other squad leaders couldn't help but feel itchy. They haven't had a real battle for a long time, and it's really itchy. Especially Enel, he is very hopeful at this moment, to be able to fight against the masters of the Puduola kingdom. Enel's eyelids drooped, and he pouted listlessly. This kingdom of Puduola is really enough to shrink the head of a turtle. We have already invaded to this point, and they have not responded in the slightest. If it's not good, we can start the war logically. The other squad leaders also shrugged and expressed their helplessness. If Chris doesn't let go for a moment, they can't go to war at will. And at the moment Jinbei boarded the ship, the garrison in the port of Puduola Kingdom also found some clues. The commander-in-chief of the port garrison, Lever, just received the following report that a ship was approaching the Chris. Just as Levert was observing, they suddenly discovered the water splashes around the Chris. Vice Admiral Grant frowned and said, "First it was a pirate ship, and then there were big and small mysterious splashes. It looks like the reinforcements from the Chris pirates have arrived. If my guess is correct, these splashes are the reinforcements of the Fishman clan. It seems that Jinbei, the seaman of Shichibukai, has arrived on the Chris." Levert gritted his teeth with a solemn expression on his face. He said in a deep voice, "The reinforcements from the Chris pirates came really fast. In such a short time, 2 groups of people have come. At this speed, all the King Shichibukai will be able to arrive today." Hint of color in Lever's eyes. Lieutenant General Grant is also very concerned. He murmured, "We don't know when our reinforcements will arrive. The movements of the big men in the palace are indeed a little slower." Grant's words came out. He felt a little inappropriate. Sure enough, he immediately felt the warning look from Levert. Lever squinted his eyes and said coldly, "King Uridan's envoy has just left, and the reinforcements will not be able to come in for a while. Pass my order, everyone should be more vigilant, take turns on duty 24 hours a day, and there can be no slack. Once you find any signs of the Chris pirates going attack, immediately shoot, don't hesitate." Lever also realized the seriousness of the matter at this moment, and he could no longer hesitate. He was very worried at the moment, and the Chris pirates attacked in advance. Indeed a big challenge for the deployment of Pudora Kingdom. The port he is stationed in is the most important thing. Once this place is lost, the Chris pirates will be able to drive straight in, extending the battlefield to the interior of the Kingdom of Pudora. Levert couldn't help shaking his head, called a soldier, and ordered, "Immediately. The situation here to His Majesty the King. Tell them, Shichibukai Jinbei, the King, has come. The other kings, Shichibukai, should not be far away." The soldier nodded quickly and said yes, then turned around and walked towards the palace. Just after the soldier left, the exhausted Levert left the observation deck and returned to his lounge. When Levert turned to leave, he casually dropped a sentence, "Don't disturb me again," of restlessness in Lever's tone. When Grant saw this, he also looked like he dared not speak out. He immediately left with a swirl of his sleeves, and he also didn't care about the matter here. Just after the two left, a huge ship quietly appeared in this sea area. Through the fog on the sea, the garrison in the port could faintly notice that this ship was unusually huge. In the distance, Gecko Moria led his subordinates, driving a terrifying three-masted sailing ship, slowly moving. Gecko Moria pirates fluttered in the wind, gradually becoming clearer and clearer. Soldiers at the port finally confirmed their identities. That's right, this pirate flag is Gecko Moria, one of the king's Shichibukai. In such a short period of time, this is the third wave of reinforcements from the Chris pirates. One of the soldiers, Vivi, shook his head and said with some fear, "Chris really called all the king's Shichibukai to come to help. Can our current lineup really resist them?" Another soldier also frowned helplessly. "We are here. The one who really bears the brunt. Collect, recommend, and share." 465. Moria has changed, full of fighting spirit, ready to fight. Seeing the reappearance of Gecko Moria, the soldiers of the Puduola kingdom stationed at the port added another big stone to their hearts. Of the Chris pirates made these soldiers tremble with fear. Because these reinforcements are not ordinary people, but people who are frightening at sea, Shichibukai. A soldier at the port, Avivi, sighed and said helplessly, "In such a short time, 3 groups have come. People. The reinforcements of the Chris pirates are really steady." Another soldier B next to him also spread his hands and said, "Let's report this news to General Lever and the others as soon as possible. Don't delay the big thing." Said, this soldier B is about to turn around and leave. However, just as he turned around, another soldier Ding grabbed him directly. "I just came back from there, it's better not to go there now." Hearing this, the surrounding soldiers were all Vivi frowning, not knowing why. Soldier Ding showed a wry smile and said helplessly, "General Lever and General Grant seem to have some unpleasantness. And because of the constant arrival of reinforcements from the Chris pirates, General Levert is probably a little tired of it. General Levert ordered not to bother him anymore because of these things." Soldier paused, then continued, "General Grant, he seems to be in a bad mood too. I think it's better not to disturb the two generals, lest they be punished." Everyone in the garrison at the port knew Levert's temperament. They know that disturbing Levert when he's in a bad mood usually doesn't end well. Everyone turned to look at the terrifying three-masted sailboat that was approaching the Chris, and all shook their heads helplessly. Now they can only watch the scene helplessly, but there is nothing they can do. Soldier B pouted and said, "I'm afraid that after a while, there will be other reinforcements coming. All we can do now is keep an eye on Carrie. They could always attack early. The soldiers stationed here have all received orders from Levert. Everyone is ready to wait, there is any slack." These soldiers all had their eyes on fire, and they didn't dare to let go of any detail. They are the outposts of the Pudora kingdom, and if they are negligent, the Chris pirates will succeed in a surprise attack. Everyone knows what the consequences are. On the other hand, the Chris, everyone in the Chris pirates, has also noticed the terrifying bark at this moment. However, their faces were full of joy, which was the exact opposite of the garrison of Pudora kingdom. The arrival of Gecko Moria is also great news for them. Looking at the terrifying three-masted sailing ship that was slowly approaching, the squad leaders looked at each other unconsciously. Lafitte pressed his hat and said with a gentleman's demeanor, "It's been a long time since we left the Devil's Triangle. Thinking about it now, that was the first time we truly defeated a King Shichibukai with our own power." Burgess Hey Isho, two fists slammed together, "Wow, ha ha ha. That was the first time I felt a hearty fight after going out to sea. Although we have spent a lot of effort, we finally don't need the captain to take action. Squad leaders recalled it. They all showed very stretched smiles. The first battle against Shichibukai was in the Kingdom of Alabasta. Facing Crocodile, the squad leaders had no way to join forces, and they were still suppressed by Crocodile. In the end, it was up to Chris to take action and solve the battle. After losing to Crocodile, the squad leaders also practiced diligently. When I met Gecko Moria, everyone's strength has been greatly improved. Cavendish held the hilt at his waist and smiled faintly. In retrospect, it was an unforgettable battle. None of us have given Gecko Moria any advantage. Poisonous can't help but feel a little false. After all, at that time, he was about to be unable to withstand it. But he still said stubbornly, "Victory over Gecko Moria is an important milestone for us." After that, each of us found self-confidence. After all, that is the legendary King Shichibukai who is above all the pirates. As for Poison, Bass and others are still more recognized. Their strength has grown by leaps and bounds, that is, it has only started from that time. However, Kuro pushed his glasses and said indifferently, "Speaking of which, Gecko Moria's strength is still quite powerful. It would be impossible to beat Gecko Moria if we hadn't used wheel battles for consumption." The most complete Filu novel resource station, supported by Miwench. If you want to join the group, add QQ 1,934,731,937, she will tell you the group number. 466. Shichibukai is so happy and admires Chris. Kuro's mind is always in a very clear state. He doesn't get caught in any kind of emotion. He knew that winning the battle at the beginning was not as easy as everyone said. Kuro continued, "In that state, apart from Enel and Lafitte, I'm afraid no one has the strength to beat him. You know, Gecko Moria at that time, but supported 7 or 8 of us, attacking in turn." Luo Y hugged the ghost and cried, and Vivi narrowed his eyes and said, "At that time, we had almost mastered armament. But in the face of such an intensity of attack, Gecko Moria is still invincible, which is enough to prove his strength. So, no one under the king, Shichibukai, should be underestimated." Lafitte also suddenly smiled faintly and said, "At the time, I definitely couldn't hold back your alternate attacks. Even after being dormant for a long time, Gecko Moria has not lost his true strength as King Shichibukai." As the voyage continued, everyone had learned about Gecko Moria. He was dormant, and in the Devil's Triangle, the state of the whole person was negative. So the squad leaders knew that the Gecko Moria they defeated was not the real Moria. Hawkins still looked like a dead man, and said without any emotion, "This time Gecko Moria has broken through. If he can come out of the Devil's Triangle, it means that he has returned to his proper state. I think he is about to return to his prime now." Mandemon Jin touched his stubble and said Isho coldly, "Gecko Moria at his peak should be a very powerful character. After all, anyone who dares to fight the 4 Emperors Kaido's idea can't be too weak. The arrival of Gecko Moria has been a great addition to us." Van Augur carried a gun and said lightly, "Everything is fate. Gecko Moria met our Chris pirates, which was a turning point in his life. If there is no captain, he will lie dormant in the Devil's Triangle for a lifetime, until he dies. Now, it's time for him to report back to the captain. Captains have high expectations for the personal reality of Gecko Moria. The most important thing is that the squad leaders are very confident that Gecko Moria's state has returned to normal." Chris looked at the horror bark from a distance, and said casually, "Gecko Moria dares to come to the new world, which means he is ready. Gecko Moria, who breaks his inner demons, will become stronger. At this moment, Gecko Moria is no longer the person we once met." Of relief in Chris' eyes. He is very happy with the change of Gecko Moria. The eagle-eyed Mahawk on the side suddenly said, "The former Gecko Moria was indeed very powerful. Otherwise, how could he become King Shichibukai?" Eagle-eyed Mahawk's eyes were like a falcon, and there was a ray of light like a thunderbolt. There are very few people in this world who can make him show such eyes. Hexia Jinbei stepped on his clogs and said with his hands on his hips, "Hee, Moria, he is finally willing to come out. I thought this guy would stay in the Devil's Triangle for the rest of his life." Even the King Shichibukai meeting of the World Government Organization, he didn't attend once. Seeing Gecko Moria's comeback, Jinbei was also a little happy for him. Didn't want to be on the side, smiled and said, "Speaking of which, Mahawk has never attended several meetings. I really have to think about it, it seems like there is only one time." Words came out, Mahawk and Jinbei looked at each other immediately, and then the three of them couldn't help laughing. Through Chris' hard work, the three finally have the opportunity to get to know each other together. It was also such an opportunity that they began to trust each other. Hawk-eyed Mahawk put his arms around him and said nonchalantly, "Anyway. Every time there is a meeting, there is no substantive content. Going or not going, doesn't make any difference to me, either." Jinbei and Hancock couldn't help feeling envy and hatred when they saw Mahawk's light-hearted appearance. Both of them are trapped by their fellow countrymen and have to be led by the nose of the world government. And Hawkeye Mahawk, one person is full, the whole family is not hungry. Besides, how could the world government be willing to let go of such a peak combat power? Hancock, who looked at the terrifying bark with his beautiful eyes, and muttered, "Finally I see it again, the terrifying bark. Seeing this ship, I seem to see the Gecko Moria that was once all-powerful." Collect, recommend, and share. 467. The birth of the Shichibukai Alliance, which changed the world. The former Gecko Moria is also an existence that can run amok in the new world. Except the four emperors, no one could suppress him at all. However, it was his high spirits that gave him the absurd idea of replacing Kaido as the four emperors. The so-called prosperity and decline is not unreasonable. Hancock couldn't help but said with some regret, if Gecko Moria hadn't lost his head, he should be stronger now. I haven't practiced in the new world for more than 10 years. Like me, he is about to be abandoned by the times. Hancock's beautiful eyes, Vivi, trembled with emotion. She suddenly thought of herself, very similar to Gecko Moria's situation. They were all in their prime, and suddenly fell into silence. Although they were famous, they were no longer worthy of their name. For many years, he has been in the same place, completely unable to keep up with the footsteps of others. So this also led Hancock and Gecko Moria to be among the Shichibukai under the king, the guy at the tail of the crane. Empress Boa Hancock suddenly turned her head and looked at Chris with complicated eyes. Thanks to the appearance of Chris, I was completely awakened. Otherwise, in a few years, the concubine will be useless except a beauty. Chris' meaning too. Boa Hancock is definitely not just the object of love. Of Chris that changed the fate of Hancock and even the entire Nine Snake Kingdom. Jinbei stroked his mustache. Hee Isho, Chris also changed Gecko Moria's fate. I have been informed that the world governments are already evaluating the performance of Gecko Moria. If nothing else, after 2 years, Gecko Moria may be removed from the title of King Shichibukai. It was Chris' appearance that pulled him out of the quagmire of the Devil's Triangle. A faint smile on Jinbei's face. He also has many friends within the world government, and it is not difficult to get this information. Eagle-eyed Mahawk said calmly, Chris' appearance has changed the fate of 1 or 2 people. Without him, the Shichibukai Alliance may never have appeared. The situation in this world will not change so much. Hawkeye Mahawk Trio 3 have a clear understanding of the changes that Chris has brought to the whole world. A very important reason why they are willing to help. Chris just has a magical power that can change everything around him. While speaking, the dread bark had come to the opposite side of the Chris. 2 pirate ships are close at hand. Bakura couldn't help sighing. As expected of the rumored terrifying 3-masted sailboat, the speed is really fast. With another ship, I'm afraid the war here is over before we can get here. Didn't take Gecko Moria long to leave the Devil's Triangle to the kingdom of Kuduola. Such a long journey, the average person needs at least 4 or 5 months. At this moment, a huge figure appeared on the bow of the terrifying 3-masted sailing ship. This man was unusually tall, with a fiery-like hairstyle and double horns on both sides of his forehead. The outline of the whole person is like a devil, and if you can see his true face, that is a real devil. The sutures all over the head and neck show the strangeness of this person. He, Chris, here I come. A familiar laughter came from this figure. The people of the Chris Pirates suddenly couldn't help laughing. This was the laughter they had heard before. Gecko Moria jumped and came directly in front of Chris. He grinned with a wide mouth, showing a mouthful of fangs, and said with a smile, "Chris, we finally meet again. It turns out that Jinbei and Mahawk are also here." Gecko Moria didn't feel too much surprise for the appearance of Empress Boa Hancock, because he had long heard that the Empress Boa Hancock fell in love with Chris. So she came to help Chris, as it should be. The existence of Hawkeye Mahawk and Jinbei made him feel a little surprised. Because of this look, both Hawkeye Mahawk and Jinbei came earlier, and their relationship seems to be much more harmonious. Although I know that Chris has been forming the Shichibukai alliance, it is still a little difficult to get these two people to come to help. Jinbei stepped on his clogs, put his arms around him, and smiled faintly. "You are finally willing to come to the New World, Moria. How about it? The New World now has undergone earth-shaking changes." Gecko Moria shrugged and said, "Indeed, the scenery on the sea is very different from before. I have to say, these guys in the New World are really powerful. If this were put in the past, they would all be world-famous pirates." The most complete Filu novel resource station, supported by Miwench. If you want to join the group, add QQ 1,934,731,937, she will tell you the group number. 468. Moria's return to the New World, full of ambition, impresses Hawkeyes. Gecko Moria has been dormant all year round, in the Devil's Triangle, and has not cared much about the outside world for a long time. At most, he knows some big events in the outside world, and some things in the first half of the Great Route. But for the New World, the information he knows is very limited. One hand, this is due to the mysterious nature of the New World. Many people have not been to the New World and have no idea what kind of place it is. Other hand, it is also due to the fact that Gecko Moria itself is very resistant to the New World. His subordinates generally only report some major events to him. And a lot of news about the New World, try not to report. Gecko Moria kept shaking his head. "Tisk tisk, thanks to Chris' help, otherwise, I wouldn't come back. In a few years, I will really be completely out of date." 4. Now these New World pirates, Gecko Moria can only be described as amazement. After entering the New World, he saw many pirates along the way. The strength of these people cannot be underestimated. If placed in an era long ago, these people could be considered strong. After all, with the departure of Roger, Rocks, Golden Lion and others, the pirate world experienced a brief withering. At that time, Whitebeard, Kaido and others were already considered the strongest among pirates. But it is still far from the achievements of Roger and others. Therefore, Gecko Moria was able to make a name for itself in the New World. However, within a few years, the era of the Great Pirate officially came. And it was during this gap that Gecko Moria quietly retreated and missed the opportunity for so many years. So now Gecko Moria, I am very grateful to Chris. If it wasn't for Chris, he might never be able to adapt to the New World. Jinbei waved his hand and said with a hearty smile, "Even if you come back now, it's not too late. With your strength, you can still win a place in the world. In this place, there are people who are really stronger than you, but also." Although there is some comfort in this statement, it is not exaggerated. Although I haven't seen Gecko Moria's strength with my own eyes for a long time, Jinbei still believes in him very much. Chris glanced at Gecko Moria, his face still indifferent. He noticed that Gecko Moria has indeed changed a lot compared to the last time. At this time, Gecko Moria was not as fat as at that time, but became much stronger. Moreover, the squad leaders also noticed that Gecko Moria's overall aura is much stronger than before. This is enough to show that Gecko Moria, who used to be extremely confident, is back. Enel floated cross-legged in the air, tilted his head and muttered. I can feel that Gecko Moria is different. Now he is much stronger than when he was in the Devil's Triangle. This is an acuity unique to Enel, who can often sense subtle changes in a person's strength. Cavendish held his sword hilt and said lightly, Your Majesty Shichibukai, it is still Your Majesty Shichibukai. The talent of these people is really not comparable to ordinary people. The same is true for Empress Boa Hancock. After entering the New World, her strength has skyrocketed in a short period of time. This, Bartolomeo also shrugged and said helplessly, a strong person like them is only temporarily weak to play. When they show their due strength, they are destined to surprise everyone. For the changes before and after the Empress Boa Hancock and Gecko Moria, the squad leaders are very envious and admired. Lafayette pressed his hat, and said indifferently Isho, that's why Chris believed in these two people so much back then. It turns out that Chris's vision is still not wrong. Burgess bumped his fists together and laughed loudly, way ha 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 ha. Looks like Gecko Moria is indeed stronger. If I have a chance, I really want to have a discussion with him alone. I don't know if the current me has the strength to fight against the King Shichibukai. Luo Wai stood aside with Guikuai in his arms, and said lightly, it's not that easy to fight Shichibukai under the king. Even with the strength of Gecko Moria, it is the end of the Shichibukai. But he still has unimaginable super strength. Especially, now he seems to have been reborn. All the squad leaders could see that this Gecko Moria, the one they defeated together with them, is completely different. Hawkins' eyelids were drooping, and he said without emotion, however, the current Burgess has also changed. He's not the Burgess he used to be. If you face Gecko Moria, maybe there is a chance. Collect, recommend, and share. 469. Shichibukai's dialogue, admiration for Chris. In Hawkins' eyes, Burgess' strength has improved rapidly. Last time he was able to defeat Lindbergh, he had already proved his strength. Also, Hawkins doesn't think Gecko Moria is so powerful. The squad leaders had teamed up to defeat him, and Hawkins couldn't help but look down at him. However, Du smiled disdainfully and sneered, in the beginning, I was able to defeat Gecko Moria, but I still relied on Enel in the end. At that time, Enel already had the power of King Shichibukai. So, that time, it can't be used as a reference. Poison looked at Burgess with interest, Gia Isho, since Chris dares to call Gecko Moria over, it shows a lot of problems. At least, in terms of strength, Chris recognizes Gecko Moria. If you want to learn from him, be careful to be beaten by him. When the squad leaders heard the poisonous words, they couldn't help but look surprised. They looked at the poisonous eyes with a bit of unfamiliar meaning. Because in the eyes of everyone, poison is often the one who is arrogant and arrogant. Unexpectedly, he was much more cautious today. While the squad leaders were discussing, Gecko Moria suddenly raised his voice. He seemed to want everyone to hear his voice. Gecko Moria looked at Chris and said excitedly, Chris, you are like a benefactor to me. If it wasn't for your presence, I couldn't have regained my confidence. On the way to the kingdom of Putuola this time, I suddenly discovered that there is still a place for me on this sea. I haven't been abandoned by this era. Saying that, Gecko Moria's eyes were filled with inexplicable determination and ambition. He continued, Chris, from now on, I am one of your most loyal allies. As long as you need any help, I will definitely do my best. In this battle of Kudora Kingdom, I will tell everything I say. Seeing the confident expression on Gecko Moria's face, Chris, Jinbei and others couldn't help but smile. They had no doubts about Gecko Moria's heartfelt words. Gecko Moria turned and stood side by side with Jinbei, looking at the boundless sea in front of her. He smiled and said, "When the battle on Kudola Kingdom is over, I will not return to the Devil's Triangle. I want to take my little ones and continue to roam in the new world. I, Moria, must regain the glory of the past, and must make a breakthrough in the new world." Jinbei reached out and patted Gecko Moria's shoulder, and said lightly, "The Shichibukai Alliance will escort you, don't worry. Chris needs help today, and we all have no turning back. If you are in trouble in the future, those of us will definitely not stand by and watch." Empress Boa Hancock showed a slight smile on her beautiful face and said, "That's right, since we all joined the Shichibukai Alliance. Then we should help each other and lend a helping hand to each other in times of crisis. I think that's what Chris is really about, building the Shichibukai Alliance. The Shichibukai Alliance is not just a fancy name, it can help us obtain more resources, and it can also save us in times of danger." Hawk-eyed Mihawk also looked indifferent, nodded and said, "I hope our alliance can really operate. This is much more real than the so-called Shichibukai system under the king." Hearing the statements of Hawkeye Mihawk and others, Gecko Moria was instantly refreshed. He also felt bright about his future in the new world. With so many masters standing behind them, whoever it is, must be very excited. His mouth wide. "Ha ha 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 ha. With your words, I am relieved. However, I think with my ability, I won't get into any trouble soon. Anyway, I will find my Moria's own territory in the new world as soon as possible." Moria is still very confident in her own strength. He believed in himself and was still able to gallop freely in the new world. Chris was still expressionless, nodded at Gecko Moria and said, "I believe in myself, I'm not wrong. And your current state is already very good. Although you have been standing still for many years, in this sea, you are still a frightening powerhouse. I look forward to the day when your name will be known in the new world." Chris looked at Gecko Moria with admiration and anticipation. He squinted his eyes, and then said, "Today you can come to help me attack the kingdom of Kudola. I have written down this affection. If there is a need in the future, I will be there as soon as possible." The most complete Filu novel resource station, supported by Miwench. If you want to join the group, add QQ 1,934,731,937, she will tell you the group number. 470. Shichibukai arrives, and a banquet is held to celebrate the arrival of victory in advance. This time Gecko Moria took the initiative to come to help out, and Chris was impressed by him. And at the same time, Chris is also very optimistic about the strength of Gecko Moria. With talent like him, there is still a lot of room for improvement. Chris will never let go of such a reliable ally. The eagle-eyed Mihawk on the side also smiled faintly. "Moria, this time you have returned to the new world, there are indeed many changes. Perhaps after a lot of experiences, your mood has made a qualitative leap. Now you, finally have the demeanor of a strong man." Eagle-eyed Mihawk's falcon-like eyes brought out a sense of identity. Gecko Moria again did make him a little surprised. Not only amazed at his return to the new world, but more importantly, the change in his whole person. Gecko Moria, who used to gallop in the new world, is powerful, but always gives people a feeling of illusoriness. At that time, Hawkeye Mihawk had a hunch that something serious would happen to Gecko Moria. Sure enough, everything that happened later confirmed the expectations of Hawkeye Mihawk. But this time, Hawkeye Mihawk can clearly feel that Gecko Moria has matured a lot. Only such a person can truly embark on the road of being strong. Recognized by Chris, Hawkeye Mihawk and Jinbei, Gecko Moria was very excited. His subordinate Absalom, Hey Isho, said, "The captain is really amazing, and he has been recognized by the three powerhouses. In the future, we will definitely make a name for ourselves in the new world." Hogbok was also holding a cigar and murmured, It won't be long before our name will spread in the New World. His Majesty Shichibukai Gecko Moria is back in the New World. This will be news that the whole world will pay attention to. Gecko Moria were suddenly full of confidence at this moment. No longer have any doubts about the future development prospects of their pirate group. It is not something ordinary people can do to be recognized by Chris and Hawkeye Miho. Lafitte pressed his hat and whispered Isho. After Gecko came, our ship became lively again. Do the math, we already have 5 Shichibukai on our ship. Bartolomeo couldn't help but sigh. Unconsciously, there are already 5. A year ago, I was fortunate enough to meet Shichibukai, a king, and I'm afraid I couldn't walk with excitement. Now, in front of us, there are 5 Shichibukai under the king. This is an incredible experience. In the world of pirates, King Shichibukai is a mysterious and powerful being. Many pirates may never see these people in their lifetime. Even Bartolomeo and the others are now strong men who are called by name. In front of King Shichibukai, they still feel that they are juniors. Lindbergh wore special glasses and smiled happily. Our Chris Pirates camp is really strong. With 5 kings under Shichibukai, are you still afraid of a Pudora kingdom? Bellamy Gia Isho reminded, don't forget, this time the captain's plan is to call the King Shichibukai over. There are 2 Shichibukai under the king, who are on their way. With our lineup, nothing has ever happened in this world. Your Majesty Shichibukai is dispatched, and there is no reason for this Pudora kingdom to continue to exist. With the arrival of Shichibukai, the king, one after another, the entire Chris seemed to be on board immediately. It is star-studded. Such a strong lineup also makes the squad leaders very excited. Chris was also very happy in his heart. He said directly to the crowd, everyone, I think we should be able to celebrate in advance now. I propose to hold a banquet on the Chris today to celebrate the victory of the Pudora Kingdom War in advance. Seeing Chris so happy, everyone on the Chris was a little surprised. It's rare for them to see Chris like this. Man-Demon Jin raised his eyebrows and said, it's rare to see the captain so happy. It seems that the captain really regards Jinbei and others as his closest friends. Luo Wei leaned against the railing with Guishu in his arms, and said lightly, the Shichibukai alliance is something the captain has been planning since he went to sea. Now the arrival of Jinbei and others also means the real success of the Shichibukai alliance. How can the captain be unhappy when such a grand idea is finally realized? Burgess bumped his fists. Hee Isho, Ha 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 ha. I like the rhythm of a grand banquet before the war. As Chris' order spread, the Chris pirates immediately get busy. Collect, recommend, and share. 471. Banquet, Shichibukai-s conversation, it's fun. Following Chris's order, the entire Chris pirates immediately entered into a state of banquet. Caribou stretched out his tongue. Hee Isho, as expected of the captain, I can still stay relaxed at this time. Holding a banquet before the war, this kind of treatment is really nice. Bartolomeo wore a green coxcomb head and said with a smile, this is the captain's behavior. If he lifts weight lightly, he can maintain such a light-hearted state at any time. This is also an expression of strength. Tessero raised his eyebrows and smiled lightly. Anyway, following the captain, you never need to be under too much pressure. No matter how difficult the situation, as long as the captain is there, everything will be easy, very easy. We now just have to enjoy it all. Since joining the Chris Pirates, Tessero quickly understood this truth. As a squad leader, he just does his own thing and obeys Chris's command. As long as he can complete the task Chris sent, that's enough. As for everything else, it's not something he needs to consider. Chris will solve all the tough problems. Except Tessero, the other squad leaders also know the truth. They all knew that Chris was a clear-headed and planned captain. Following Chris, you don't need to spend too much energy at all to think about some things. Apu made a hip-hop gesture and said with a smile, it's really good. Just arrived on the ship, just in time for such a banquet. Sure enough, joining the Chris Pirates is definitely not wrong. Was because of Chris' name that EPUB took the initiative to go to the Alabasta Kingdom branch. And now, he doesn't regret his original choice. Saying that, EPUB revealed his big die, and in full view, it instantly turned into a keyboard. EPUB's long arms wrapped around the keyboard and played a cheerful tune. At the same time, his abdomen turned into a drum. For a time, the sound of the piano and the drums brought everyone into a very cheerful rhythm. Perona's eyes lit up when she saw this scene. She immediately flew to EPUB's side happily, kept wrapping around his head, looking up and down. EPUB. Perona said with a smile, EPUB is really fun. Teeth can be turned into piano keys, and belly can be turned into drums. Other places must also be able to become a variety of musical instruments. As if hearing Perona's expectations, EPUB tugged at his ears. In the surprised eyes of Perona and others, his ear turned into a trumpet. EPUB picked up the trumpet with a very calm expression, and began to blow it for himself. And Perona and the others couldn't help but tut their tongues in amazement, and let out one after another sigh. Baccarat tucked his hair together and couldn't help laughing. This EPUB is really an interesting guy. It's the first time I've seen such a strange ability of him. Nami also had two small dimples on her face, and she said with a sweet smile, I didn't expect EPUB not only to have outstanding strength, but also to play a first-class musical instrument. We, the Chris Pirates, have another musician. Karina, Hihi Isho, clapped her hands excitedly. When you're bored in the future, you can let EPUB play music for us. He must be able to change all kinds of instruments. With the sound of EPUB's music, the atmosphere of the banquet of the Chris Pirates came up immediately. Squad leaders took action one after another, preparing tables, chairs, benches, and various foods. Chef Carmen is even more busy today, cooks by himself and wants to cook all kinds of food for everyone. At the same time, the bartender Meaty is also busy. For Nami and others, for everyone to taste during leisure and entertainment. And Chris has been cultivating on weekdays, and she has no chance at all to mix drinks for Chris. Today, she finally waited for this, a great opportunity to mix drinks for Chris. Seeing that Meaty was mixing drinks, Makino smiled softly. In addition to special drinks, other fine wines, but it can't be missing. Said, Makino took some people to the wine cellar to take out the fine wine that the Chris Pirates kept. Blink of an eye, the deck of the Chris Pirates was already filled with all kinds of food and wine. A wide variety of desserts are naturally indispensable. Everyone performed their duties, and soon everything needed for the banquet was ready. Gecko Moria was stunned for a moment, then murmured, this speed is too fast, right? Chris, how many chefs and pastry chefs do you have in stock? Jinbei has already held up a glass of wine and smiled, it's really surprising. The most complete Filu novel resource station, supported by Miwench. If you want to join the group, add QQ, 1,934,731,937, she will tell you the group number. 473. Arrogant Doflamingo, disgusting. The appearance of Gecko Moria is what surprised Doflamingo the most. Although over the years, Doflamingo has also seen Gecko Moria a few times. But Gecko Moria's previous state has already made Doflamingo look down on him. And this time, Gecko Moria is back in the new world, which is unprecedented news. Doflamingo murmured, this guy Gecko Moria has finally gathered up his courage and returned to the new world. It's a pity that the current new world is no longer the new world it used to be. The state of Gecko Moria is probably going to plummet. Doflamingo's tone was full of ridicule and disdain. He then said to himself, the current Gecko Moria, other than the identity of the King Shichibukai, has no merit. I don't know why Chris called him over. Is it possible that he still has the power to fight? Doflamingo is obviously not quite convinced. He has been in contact with many pirates all the year round, and he knows how deep the water in the New World is. It's really hard to get a foothold in the New World without two brushes. Between the Chris pirates and the Pudola Kingdom must be a dialogue between the strong. Doflamingo doesn't think Gecko Moria can do anything. He smiled strangely, but it's really not easy for Chris to call him to the New World. After all, this place is like a purgatory on Earth to Gecko Moria. A cruel smile appeared on Doflamingo's face. He knew that all of Gecko Moria's former friends died in the New World. So Gecko Moria has always been very afraid of the New World. But Chris is still able to let him break through the psychological barrier. Not everyone has such an ability. The appearance of Doflamingo was not only noticed by the Chris pirates. He has always been more arrogant, so he immediately attracted everyone's attention. Among them, of course, also included the soldiers at the port of Pudora Kingdom. But this time, the reaction of these soldiers seemed very numb. Soldier A looked up and said, in a blink of an eye, another one came. Looking at the pink figure, dressed like this, it could only be Doflamingo. Soldier B was expressionless and nodded numbly. This should be here today, the third King Shichibukai. Do the math, and now only Bartholomew Kuma has not come. Soldier Ding smiled casually and said casually, if nothing else happens, Bartholomew Kuma will appear soon. Anyway, Chris this time, is to let all the King Shichibukai, all participate in this war. With his reputation and ability, I believe no one will deny him this face. Soldier A nodded and glanced back at Lavert and Grant's room. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Forget it, there's no need to report anything to the top. Anyway, everything that should have happened has already happened. And the people above must know these things. The constant arrival of reinforcements from the Chris pirates has completely numbed these soldiers. To have accepted this fact. Soldier Ding Vivi sighed and murmured, the strength of the Chris pirates has become stronger and stronger. If Bartholomew Kuma comes again, the lineup of Shichibukai under the whole king is really scary. This kind of Chris pirates, our Pudora Kingdom, can really withstand it. Soldier B also had a worried look on his face, shrugged his shoulders and said, such a terrifying lineup is not just talking about it. All the King Shichibukai shot, that kind of scene, must be a real fairy fight. After this battle, the kingdom of Pudora may really cease to exist. These soldiers felt a lot of pressure from the increasingly strong lineup of the Chris pirates. They couldn't help but be afraid. On the Chris, it was a little quieter at the moment. The banquet just now faded a lot in an instant. In the Chris pirates has a bad impression of Doflamingo. Eagle-eyed Mahawk looked up at Doflamingo who was approaching, and said coldly, this guy really knows how to pick his time. Coming here at this time is such a disappointment. Obviously, for Doflamingo's arrival, Hawkeye Mahawk did not welcome it very much, but rather rejected it. Long time, Mahawk's impression of Doflamingo was not very good. Jinbei also looked up at the sky and couldn't help sighing. This guy, after all, is here. But it's really not easy for Chris to call this alien over here. The most complete Filu novel resource station, supported by Miwench. If you want to join the group, add QQ 1,934,731,937, she will tell you the group number. 475. Doflamingo dare not speak out, afraid of Chris. The appearance of Doflamingo once again confirmed the power of Chris. This also made Jinbei, Gecko Moria and others feel a little emotional from the bottom of their hearts. Although Chris is strong, they have long since been not clear. But seeing today's scene, they still feel a little incredible. Bakura tucked his hair together and said generously, Doflamingo, one of the Shichibukai under the king, is still here. Although this person's character is extremely bad, his personal strength is still very powerful. It is indeed very suitable for dealing with the kingdom of Pudora. Betty flicked the cigarette ash and said lightly, being defeated by Chris several times in a row, he has long been afraid. If he dare not come, Chris can make him disappear from this world in minutes. Doflamingo is still very afraid of Chris' means. Betty let out a breath of smoke and glanced at the pink figure in the air. In her eyes, the current Doflamingo is just a tool in the hands of Chris. Whatever Chris asks him to do, he has to do it. There is absolutely no chance to resist. Alvida, who was on the side, carried a huge mace, smiled disdainfully, and said, "He really doesn't need to be respected." When Chris called him over, he never gave him a smile. This guy casually rejected Chris on the surface, but now, isn't he coming over? Chris called all the King Shichibukai the other day. Alvida and the others could hear them clearly. They still remember. Chris told Doflamingo, "If you don't come, you will be at your own risk." Nami smiled Isho, shrugged and said, "Doflamingo is a bully and a tough guy. He's tough, but he's not stupid. He must know very well that if he does not accept Chris' invitation to come to the kingdom of Kudora, his own fate will be very tragic." Perona flew up and down in the air and said with a smile, "He doesn't dare to take any chances with Chris. It's not that he hasn't seen Chris, and it's easy to kill him." Perona and the others knew in their hearts that Doflamingo was not Chris's enemy at all. If Chris wants to kill Doflamingo, it's a no-brainer. And even on the Kudola Kingdom side, the Chris pirates are in crisis. Chris is still able to go to Dressrosa and get rid of Doflamingo without changing his face. And about this, Doflamingo. Naturally, I can think of it. Makino smiled softly and said softly, "This is Chris's deterrent power. Even an unscrupulous guy like Doflamingo dare not challenge Chris' bottom line at will. It is impossible for any other person to have such a deterrent." In the eyes of Makino and others, Chris is a special existence in this world. His power can always be reflected anywhere. In another place on the deck of the Chris, the squad leaders also looked up at the sky. Luo Y hugged the ghost and cried, leaned on the railing, and said coldly, "Doflamingo, I still know the captain's character very well. He knows what will happen if he doesn't accept the captain's invitation. The captain has never been soft-hearted towards his enemies." Luo looked at Doflamingo who was approaching, and couldn't help but feel some pleasure in his heart. Seeing Doflamingo in front of Chris, like a dog. Luo's heart, not to mention how happy. Like him, of course, there is Tessero. Tessero showed a look of disgust and said disdainfully, looking at Doflamingo, "Hurry, he really looks like a dog." But it's a blessing for Doflamingo to be the captain's dog. Luo and Tessero suddenly looked at each other and laughed at the same time. Seeing Doflamingo's current situation, they were suddenly in a trance. Luo Vivi narrowed his eyes and murmured, "The appearance of the captain has really changed a lot of things. Before the change, I never imagined that Doflamingo would be what it is today." Tessero also smiled proudly, "But this guy Doflamingo is still somewhat useful. This time, in the war with Kudora Kingdom, he can come in handy anyway." Luo and Tessero hate Doflamingo very much. They are still able to maintain their sanity. They knew that Chris didn't just call Doflamingo for a show. May not matter to others, but Doflamingo, you must contribute in this war. The most complete Filu novel resource site, supported by Miwenge. If you want to join the group, add QQ 1,934,731,937. She will tell you the group number. 476. The strength of the Chris pirates shocked Dover. Chris went to great lengths to call all the King Shichibukai. He did was let the Shichibukai alliance officially appear in front of the world. Moreover, the full appearance of the Shichibukai alliance, to a certain extent, will have a great deterrent effect. At least, on the psychological level, the kingdom of Kudora is already at a disadvantage. No matter what. Whether Shichibukai will contribute, Chris wants them, but they can appear. But, Doflamingo, there will definitely be an exception. Tessero, hee Isho, said happily, Doflamingo is such a free fighting force, you don't need it for nothing. Captain will never let Doflamingo go so easily. Other King Shichibukai can do nothing, but this guy, Doflamingo, doesn't dare to do anything. Luo embraced the ghost crying, and smiled strangely. Perhaps Doflamingo hasn't realized all this yet. I really want to see what kind of expression he will have at that time. Seeing Doflamingo deflated is definitely the happiest thing for me. Luo and Tessero quickly accept the fact that they will fight alongside Doflamingo. But at this moment, their hearts were extremely relaxed. Because of Chris' existence, Doflamingo has become a complete joke. Enel floated cross-legged in the air, tilted his head, and said casually, Doflamingo's strength is still very powerful. Even now, I'm not sure enough to beat him. The last time we played against him, the gap between our strengths was indeed very huge. So the captain called him here. It is a very important supplement to our combat effectiveness. Lafayette squeezed his hat and shook the wine glass in his hand. So, this is where the captain is great. Such a powerful being does not dare to disobey the captain's orders in the slightest. As time goes on, the strength gap between Doflamingo and the captain is getting bigger and bigger. Lafitte took a sip of the red wine and smiled lightly. He recognizes the strength of Doflamingo very much, but doesn't respect much. Burgess bumped his fists and snorted softly. The difference in strength between Doflamingo and the captain was originally huge. The first time the two of them met, the captain scared Doflamingo away without much effort. I remember that the captain didn't exert much effort at that time. Burgess lit up when it came up. It was as if he himself had beaten Doflamingo away. The poison on the side also smiled and added, so the second time we met, Doflamingo didn't even have the courage to fight with the captain. The captain just said a few words, and he ran away in a panic. Really, too weak. Many squad leaders have never seen Chris and Doflamingo fighting with their own eyes. Of them, just know the last time Chris scared off Doflamingo. Hawkins was expressionless, his eyelids drooping and said, listen to what you said, Doflamingo's strength doesn't seem to be particularly strong. Last time Enel had a fight with him, I thought how powerful he was. Lafitte raised his eyebrows and smiled faintly. It's not surprising that he can beat Enel. After all, he's a real King Shichibukai. And at the beginning, his fight with the captain was not without any flashpoints. At least, in the face of the captain's terrifying strength, Doflamingo still responded. Luo also suddenly said at this time, it's just that compared to the captain, Doflamingo is indeed much weaker. However, his strength is still at the top level in the whole new world. Otherwise, Enel would not have been defeated by him. Although Luo hates Doflamingo, he still recognizes Doflamingo's strength very much. Under everyone's discussion, Doflamingo finally landed on the Chris. A pink figure appeared in front of everyone. Breakthrough. At the same time, this magical laughter rang out again. Doflamingo's eyes looked around, and he said to himself, Chris pirates, they are really strong. Just relying on these squad leaders, I'm afraid it's enough to conquer the kingdom of Kudora. Not to mention, there are Hakai Mahak and Jinbei and others. Doflamingo turned his head, looked at Chris, and murmured, Chris, I admire your abilities more and more. I didn't expect you to have such a powerful appeal. Collect, recommend, and share. 478. Chris doesn't give Dover face, very hockey. Tessero chose to speak to Doflamingo, always with a gentle smile. He smiled and said, if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't have a chance to join the Chris pirates. If that's the case, I may regret it for the rest of my life. After all, for a great existence like the Chris pirates, not all cats and dogs can join. You may never have thought that we can still fight side by side. Tessero's gentle smile, full of disdain and ridicule towards Doflamingo. He just wanted to tell Doflamingo that he was no longer threatening. On the Chris, no one dared to do anything to the members of the Chris pirates. Doflamingo's face immediately became gloomy, like a dark cloud. Looking at Tessero's provocative eyes, he couldn't give any response. This made Doflamingo feel a little embarrassed. Doflamingo suddenly looked up to the sky and burst into laughter. Buck. Sure enough, Chris's subordinates are all extraordinary. He soon returned to Chris's side, trying to talk to Chris and the others. But the likes of Hawkeye Mahawk and Jinbei did not have a good impression of Doflamingo. So at this moment, Shichibukai, the king, headed by Hawkeye Mahawk, remains indifferent. They don't want to talk to Doflamingo, or say anything about him. And not only Hawkeye Mahawk and others, but also the squad leaders of the Chris pirates, did not like Doflamingo very much. They haven't said a word since Doflamingo came aboard the Chris. For a time, the atmosphere on the Chris became a little weird. Standing alone in the middle of the deck, Doflamingo seemed out of tune with everything around him. And he himself knew that he was in a very embarrassing situation. This made Doflamingo, who is naturally proud, a great humiliation. Doflamingo clenched his teeth tightly, and a burst of anger was burning. He had never been treated like this before. Chris watched this coldly, not speaking for Doflamingo. Anyway, in his heart, there is no need to have any respect for Doflamingo. Doflamingo's face was sinking. He looked up at Chris, and murmured, "Chris, you asked me to come over, I'm here." "Well, I am not late, am I?" Doflamingo knew that nothing could happen, so he forced himself a step and took the initiative to talk to Chris. Chris said indifferently, "Well, your speed is not slow. It's hard work for you to travel from Dressrosa to Pudora Kingdom." Chris gestured to Doflamingo Vivi with the wine glass in his hand. He then continued, "Since you're here, let's sit down and attend the banquet together. It happens that we are on board, ready to celebrate before the war begins." Chris suddenly changed the conversation and said, "Of course, if you feel a little tired from the long journey. There are many rooms on my Chris. I can arrange a room for you and have a good rest." Was always no change in expression on Chris's face. And his tone was also very flat. Chris treated Doflamingo neither too warmly nor too coldly. After all, in the war with Pudora Kingdom tomorrow, this guy Doflamingo is still a bit valuable. But Doflamingo doesn't seem to be not listening to Chris's words. He waved his hand casually and said with a smile, "Such a distance is nothing. If you're tired because of this, how can you be Shichibukai?" After successfully talking to Chris, Doflamingo's whole person became a lot easier. He continued, "Furthermore, it is very difficult for us, Shichibukai, to gather so many people. Since we finally got together today, naturally we have to sit down and have a good chat." Doflamingo seemed to have forgotten the unpleasantness just now and looked familiar. He immediately found a seat and sat down, and said with a smile, "Now we are all members of the Shichibukai Alliance. The Shichibukai Alliance has just been formally established. I think we need to discuss this matter carefully. The cooperation between the seven of us directly affects how high the Shichibukai Alliance can reach in the end." Between Doflamingo's words, he used the Shichibukai Alliance to threaten Hawkeye Mahawk and others. His overtone is, if the few of us can't work together, the Shichibukai Alliance will fail. And at this moment, there is a sudden sound of breaking in the sky. Philo reminds you. Reading 3 things to favorite, recommend, share. 479. Here comes the big bear, and the last Shichibukai appears. The moment Doflamingo sat down, there was a sound of breaking through the sky above the Chris. With the sound of breaking through the air, a figure said, "Hey." For a moment, immediately appeared on the deck of the Chris. This sudden figure, immediately, it attracted the attention of the entire Chris pirates. Squad leaders, in particular, were very surprised. They could never have imagined that in today's new world, someone would dare to break into the Chris pirates so blatantly. Everyone looked closely and saw that this figure was a burly figure. His height was only one shorter than Gecko Moria. Just a little bit. This man is tall, wide at the top and narrow at the bottom, wearing a long black jacket on the upper body and a pair of gray trousers on the lower body. In his hand, he held a thick Bible. It is worth noting that his clothes are dotted with bare paw prints one after another. After Chris saw this person, a smile finally appeared on his flat face. He smiled faintly, finally here. Who suddenly appeared as naturally the last Shichibukai under the king, Bartholomew Kuma. Bartholomew Kuma is a person with flesh and fruit ability, he can bounce everything through his palm. Therefore, Bartholomew is also a rare pirate with the ability to quickly move through space. Although his speed is a bit slower than Chris's, it is absolutely amazing. So when Bartholomew Kuma appeared on the Chris was not surprised at all. His speed, as it should be. Seeing Bartholomew Kuma appear, Koala is of course the most excited one. She couldn't help but whispered excitedly, "Master Bear is here too." He's still the same, with a cold look, which is really intimidating. Bakura tucked his hair together and said with a smile, "So, this is the legend, the Tyrant Bear." Looking at his cold appearance, he does look like a tyrant. Ordinary people, I'm afraid they wouldn't dare to provoke him easily. However, Koala pouted and smiled, "Don't be fooled by his appearance. Although Mr. Shang looks like strangers should not be approached, and he may kill people at any time. But after you really get to know him, you will find that Mr. Shang is actually a very gentle and warm person." The reason why he is called a tyrant. There seems to be a lot of hidden secrets in it. In the Revolutionary Army, Koala once overheard Long and others talking about it. Although she still doesn't know why Bartholomew Kuma is called tyrant. But she is very sure that Bartholomew Kuma is definitely not a cold-blooded pirate who is addicted to murder. Bonnie also showed a very relieved smile when he saw the appearance of Bartholomew Kuma. She and Bartholomew Kuma haven't seen each other for a long time, but everything is the way she remembers. Bonnie Vivi Isho said softly, "He isn't really a bloodthirsty person. He's the most gentle man I've ever met." Bonnie couldn't help recalling the time when the father and daughter used to live together. But Bonnie is not impulsive, she has been doing her best to suppress her emotions. Like Koala, she did not expose her relationship with Bartholomew Kuma in public. Because on the Chris, there are not only madmen like Doflamingo who can't fully control. There might be Marines or intelligence personnel from other organizations in the vicinity of the Chris. At least for now, Bartholomew Kuma's true identity has not been revealed. He has a biological daughter, and he must not let other people know. Otherwise, all the previous efforts will likely be in vain overnight. Betty casually flicked the ash, and said indifferently, "Bartholomew Kuma is indeed a top-ranked existence among the King Shichibukai." Just standing there, he gave a very strong sense of oppression. We can obviously feel that his whole body is full of endless power. Carrying a huge mace, Alvita murmured, "Many years ago, his bounty was 296 million 2 Baileys. You know, this was a bounty many years ago. One can imagine how powerful Bartholomew Kuma's personal strength is." Reiju stroked the hair in front of his forehead, Vivi's beautiful eyes flowed, and smiled, "Even today, this is a very high reward. Now the bounty is close to 300 million pirates, every one of them is a captain of a pirate regiment who can act on his own. If Bartholomew hadn't become King Shichibukai, the amount of his bounty would be very likely will surpass the 1 billion mark, or even say, closer to the 1.5 billion mark. 480. Bear's strength is very strong, recognized by Hawkeye. In the entire sea, there are only a handful of people whose bounty exceeds the 1.5 billion Bailey mark. And they are the tigers in the New World, the 4 emperors. Only when the strength reaches their level, can the bounty be able to break through the 1.5 billion Bailey mark. Although what Reiju said was a bit exaggerated, Bartholomew Kuma's strength should not be underestimated. Looking at the whole new world, apart from 4 emperors and Chris and others, no one dared to say that they could stably restrain him. Makino smiled Isho, and said generously, Bartholomew Kuma's strength has always been considered the top 3 among the Shichibukai under the king. But I personally think he is much stronger than Doflamingo's. Perona was flying around in the air, curled her lips and said, I don't know who is stronger between him and Doflamingo. But Bartholomew looks a lot more aggressive than Doflamingo. Is this person really as gentle as Bonnie and the others say? Perona's small face bulged, looking inexplicably aggrieved. Nami looked at Perona, smiled and shook her head, no matter what. What kind of person is Bartholomew Kuma? Anyway, I can see that Chris trusts him very much. Bartholomew Kuma will be one of our most loyal allies. And he has extremely powerful strength, and he must be very reliable. Kaya blinked her big eyes and smiled sweetly. The arrival of Bartholomew Kuma is very important to us. He is not only able to play a very crucial role in the war with Kudora Kingdom. Furthermore, his arrival also officially represents the gathering of all members of the Shichibukai Alliance. The Shichibukai Alliance is what Chris has been trying to accomplish. The smooth arrival of Bartholomew Kuma has a very special meaning for the Chris pirates. Nami and others also know how important the establishment of the Shichibukai Alliance is to Chris. On the other side, the squad leaders looked at this burly figure and praised him. Burgess bumped his fists together with an envious look. He smiled and said, as expected of the rumored Bartholomew Kuma, one of the strongest in the sea. It's quite a figure of this size. It would be great if I could have such a physique. Burgess' figure is quite outstanding among the entire Chris pirates. No matter the size of the body or the size of the muscles, there are really not many people who can compare with him. But after meeting Bartholomew Kuma, Burgess is undoubtedly not enough. Bartholomew Kuma's figure is indeed much better than his. Poisonous hunched over his body, he sneered weakly, if you want to reach that level, I'm afraid it will take decades of experience. Unless, you can practice as hard as the captain. Bartholomew, but the senior on this sea, everything he has is hard-won. Burgess spread his hands helplessly and smiled bitterly. Cultivation like a captain. Just spare me. I'd rather spend a lot of time. Not everyone can do what the captain does. Chris Pirates knows how hard Chris cultivated, and no one knows it. But everyone can only express admiration and yearning for that way, because not all of them are Chris. Even if they have strong self-control, it is impossible to have the ability to reject fatigue and hunger. Lafitte pressed his hat, and Isho said indifferently, Bartholomew Kuma's coercion is indeed very heavy. Sure enough, no one who can become King Shichibukai is weak. Looking at Bartholomew Kuma's extraordinary bearing, we know that he has always been a high-ranking person. Only superiors can possess such a special aura. Since Bartholomew Kuma appeared, many squad leaders, including Lafitte, have felt a strong sense of oppression. Natural oppression of the superiors on the inferiors. When the Hakai Mahak appeared, they all had this feeling. Enel's eyes, there is a trace of desire undisguised. He could strongly feel the power of Bartholomew Kuma. Enel licked his lips and murmured, his strength is no worse than Doflamingo. It is even said that he is very likely to be stronger than Doflamingo. Chris is right. In this new world, there will always be Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and the strong are like forests. Enel was now standing on the ground again, staring at Bartholomew Kuma. I don't know if there is a chance. Collect, recommend, and share. 481. Enel vs. Bear, both of them are very strong. Enel's desire for the strong is unmatched by other squad leaders. He is looking forward to himself very much, being able to fight against different powerhouses. Although he clearly understood that the Bartholomew Kuma in front of him might be stronger than Doflamingo. But Enel, he wouldn't hold back. The golden staff in one hand, Enel murmured, "It would be great if we could fight Bartholomew Kuma once. Such a powerful existence cannot be encountered at any time. After the last defeat against Doflamingo, my weaknesses were exposed. My strength has also given me a chance to advance by leaps and bounds." Enel couldn't help laughing, and said lightly, "If we can fight Bartholomew Kuma again, it won't matter if we win or lose. I will definitely be able to discover many of my own problems from the battle and improve. I just don't know if there will be such an opportunity." Enel is very good at fighting to support war, and through constant battles, he finds his own shortcomings. After he lost to Chris, his strength improved. After losing to Doflamingo, his strength has been improved again. So now, Enel is no longer afraid of failure. He is eager to fight against the strong, and he doesn't care what the final result is. What he cares about is whether he can gain some experience from the battle with the strong. "Your strength will be improved." The crow wore a black mask and said coldly, "Your strength is already strong enough. If you play Bartholomew Kuma, it's not really sure who wins or loses. Since this time, I think you have been a little different from before." Luo Wai stood aside with Guiku in his arms, and said lightly, "Last time, the gap between you and Doflamingo was not too big. After this period of growth, I think you and Doflamingo's strengths are now on a par with each other. So even if you are playing against Baxiang now, it's not necessarily weaker. It's not just the likes of Burgess and Kuro who have improved over this period. Enel's improvement in strength is also in sight. Everyone gets along day and night, and any change will be easily noticed by the people around." Kuro pushed his glasses slightly and laughed softly. "However, recently, I'm afraid you don't have much chance. Before the war with the Kingdom of Kudora, Bartholomew Kuma probably won't discuss anything with you. So if you really want to fight him, you can only wait until after we capture the Kingdom of Kudora." Fanka was carrying a gun, and Isho said, "But this day, it won't be too far away. Now that the Shichibukai alliance has gathered and won the Kingdom of Kudora, it is nothing but an easy task." There was not much expression on Enel's face. With a calm look on his face, he said coldly, "Don't take this matter too seriously. The real strength of Doflamingo and Bartholomew Kuma is not as simple as we see it. My strength, perhaps not at all, is comparable to that of Doflamingo." As soon as this statement came out, the other squad leaders were all surprised by Vivi. They were not surprised by the strength of Doflamingo and Bartholomew Kuma as Enel said. Squad leaders just didn't expect that Enel, who has always been proud, would actually say such a thing. It's a bit equivalent, he was taking the initiative to show his weakness. This is not the one you all know. Enel didn't care too much about the reactions of the squad leaders. That he has a very clear understanding of his own strength. And the one who fought against Doflamingo was himself. So Enel is more aware of how terrifying the strength of Doflamingo is. And Bartholomew Kuma's power, compared with Doflamingo, must be almost the same. Hawkins still looked like a dead man, and said without emotion, "If you look at it this way, Bartholomew Kuma's strength is indeed very strong. But now, he's our ally. Anyway, his arrival is a good thing for us." The squad leaders all nodded and welcomed the arrival of Bartholomew Kuma. The reaction of everyone at this time was in stark contrast to when Doflamingo came just now. The Chris also gradually recovered. Doflamingo also felt very unhappy when he saw such a scene. But he couldn't make it too obvious. He could only let out a piercing laugh. Young. Bartholomew Kuma, this guy is still the same. I'm always willing to put on such a cold attitude and bring a kind of inexplicable pressure to others. equals 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 equals